All right, I want to welcome everybody to the Uphill Athlete Zoomcast this week. And myself, Steve House, and Mark Postle will be talking about how to climb Denali. So just want to quickly introduce myself a little bit, my background with Denali real briefly, and then talk about and then I'll let Mark do the same. But my first trip on the West Buttress was actually as a Puntas mountain guide in, I was trying to remember, either 93 or 94 with a guy named Doug Chabot. And I've guided a lot of trips up there. I don't remember anymore, honestly. It was mostly in the 90s, bunch of West Buttress trips and 2 successful West Rib trips and 1 unsuccessful Cassine trip, which I saw Mark on that trip. And yeah, I haven't guided up there in a few years, but I've also climbed up there quite a bit. I've established 3 different new routes on the Massif on 3 different places, parts of the mountain, and have quite a bit of personal climbing experience with that too. So Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and experience with Denali? I'll just introduce Mark by saying he's one of our main coaches with Uphill Athlete, and one of the strengths he brings is he has a big background as a mountain guide. So for training athletes for mountains like Aconcagua and Denali and Everest, he's been to all those places and climbed there. So he's a great asset to us as a team.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, my Denali history looks a little bit like Steve's, just a little later. I started when I was a little older than Steve did. He started when he was pretty young. And I think I started either 2003 or 4, so about 10 years after Steve. And I did, I think I was there for 14 out of 15 seasons. I didn't go in 2011, but I was there as recently as 2 years ago, doing either 1 or 2 trips a season, depending on the year. Mostly group, big group guided trips on the West Buttress, some private trips, and then I've done a couple of personal trips into the range, especially in the early years before that. So pretty familiar with the mountain, obviously, and it is interesting mountain to climb, and it's terrain and environment that's not very normal for people to have a lot of experience in that kind of Arctic environment. So I think it's good. It's a good, interesting goal for people, but there are some things that are specific to it that you want to be prepared for. So yeah, and like Steve said, that's one of the big things that I do at Uphill Athlete is help prepare people for these peaks that I have a fair amount of experience in, be it, Aconcagua or Denali. So yeah, I love working with folks that have that on their list for 2021.
Great. So I'm going to start off by reminding everyone that we currently have all our training plans and coaching and custom training plans on sale. There's more information over on the website. We have a brand new product this week called the At-Home Strength and Core Training Plan, which is you get a year subscription for $25. So that's a pretty cool new product for us that we're just launching. And then of course we've had a lot of great response. We've been making through all these Zoom presentations. We've made our 7-hour lecture series called the Mountain Performance Workshop. We've made that half its former price of $25, or half its former price was $49. It's now $25, and those are all available in the shop on the website. So check those out. So as we get started here, I'm going to let's see. All of you are aware that Denali is the highest mountain in North America. And what we're going to talk about is, this talk is going to be specific to non-guided climbers. If you're going with one of the guided groups, Mark and I both worked for a couple of the different outfits up there. They all do a great job. We're not going to really address them as a group too much, and I would really like to keep this to tips and tricks for you private climbers out there. So So on that, we are going to start with a couple of things that are specific to gear. We're going to, in this first part of the talk, we're going to sort of front load with some sort of generic tips and tricks that are universal for the whole mountain. And then we're going to basically move up the mountain and take you to the summit. So Mark, you want to talk about boots for Denali for a minute?
Yeah, sure. So climbing by the West Buttress route is not super technical in the scheme of alpine climbing, but it is cold. And I think that's one thing that's a little bit underestimated by people. So boot choice is super important. And I've always kind of been of the opinion that it's a good place to be pretty conservative with your footwear choices and err on the warm side. And historically, originally I wore plastic boots up there, and then there was kind of the Spantic era when everyone was wearing those, and that is actually a pretty good Denali boot. But then I came to wear like a proper triple boot. I have the Sportiva Oli Monzas. And while they're not an inexpensive boot, that's a really good boot for a West Buttress trip because you don't have to worry about your feet getting frostbitten. It's just one less thing. It's just one less thing to worry about. That being said, some of the more modern boots that have come out now, like the Sportiva G2s that are in this picture, those are my wife and I's boots, is a pretty warm boot, and it's a little trimmer. So, especially for a June trip or later trip, that might be an appropriate boot, especially if your feet tend to run a little warm. But be conservative with your boot choice, and don't be afraid to bring over boots. The one problem with that is the crampons over the boot is just it's one layer more. It's a little bit of a hassle to deal with for some people that aren't super used to it. So that's why I think, for the average contestant, like an Oli Mons is just a really simple solution to all those issues. So yeah, your toes are important. Summit day can be quite cold on Denali. So be more conservative with your boot choice than you might be at those same elevations and other ranges in the planet, for sure.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that I've noticed a lot of Himalayan climbers, people who are experienced climbing the Himalaya, come to Denali and are surprised how much colder it is. And I can vouch for that as well with my experience in the Himalaya. It's a very cold place, so you need to be conservative. Mark and I both have all our fingers and toes, and we both subscribe to have independently, before we even knew each other, to this philosophy of always kind of going long on boots and mittens and gloves and stuff. So the next thing I want to talk about is just the weather. Most of these slides that we happen to have today are in great weather. But keep in mind that the weather can be really bad, and it can be the biggest factor in the climbing the West Buttress in particular. Let's keep rolling because we got a ways to go. This is
the one thing I would add to that, Steve, is when like you're saying, those crevasses are big, and a lot of people tend not to have very much rope in service in smaller crevasses and smaller ranges, like in the Alps and maybe some places in the lower 48, and especially late season on Denali, if you have 3 or maybe even 4 team members, I think it's good to have a lot of rope out and put a little bit of distance between the folks on that lower glacier, because some of those crevasses are quite wide, and you don't necessarily want to be stacked right on top of each other.
Yeah, if you are not sure about glacier travel at all, you probably should be going with a guided group. To be honest, we're talking about climbers who have the experience to do this on their own, and I realize that our audience today may be mixed on both sides of that line, but if that would be something that would, if you're not familiar with glacier travel in Alaska, then you should probably be with a mountain guide. So this is Talkeetna. We just wanted to put this picture up because we want people to know there's really not very much there. This is the store, Nagleaf store. This is the best store in town. They sell licenses, ammunition, fountain soft drinks, fish and tackle, ice, and sandwiches. And other than sandwiches, you really don't need any of those things for climbing Denali. So you basically have to do all your shopping in Anchorage. There is a small climbing shop run by Alaska Mountaineering School in Talkeetna there, where you might be able to buy a little bit of isobutane canisters if you're going that way. We'll talk about stoves, some cordelette, a few really basic things, some clothing items, but they don't have too much. If your luggage gets lost, don't show up in Talkeetna and expect to outfit yourself for Denali. This goes back to what we were just talking about. You need to know how to do this stuff. You need to know how to self-rescue out of a crevasse before you get there. This is not something that you have to be on a glacier to practice either. You can do this lots of places. This is actually in an old church where this picture is taken. You know, you can learn with your buddies. You can learn how to, you know, self-rescue using pulleys and mechanical advantage. You know, there's books written about this. There's lots of information. There's lots of guide services that are running courses on how to do this stuff. If you get to Talkeetna, you don't absolutely know how to do this, and you're not going with a guide service, then you've already made a pretty big mistake, and you're probably not going to be successful, to be honest. I'm just trying to be clear so that, you know, people don't have unmet expectations. So have I made myself clear about crevasses and glacier travel in Alaska? So let's see. Let's talk about food a little bit, Mark. Why don't you start us off here? Because this is a really important topic for the non-guided parties, I think. And one of the things where I've seen people make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, I think that I think it's hard to overstress the food component. You know, it's obviously what gives you energy for the trip. This is a long duration trip in a cold environment compared to what a lot of people have done in their mountaineering background. You know, if you're climbing Rainier or some of these smaller peaks that, you know, people do in 1 to 3 days, then you kind of misjudge the food situation. It's not that big a deal. If you're on Denali for 20 days and you've horrendously misjudged the food situation, it is a big deal. You're not going to have the energy and recovery capacity that you need from day to day. But it also really, it becomes like a morale issue. You know, you'll see up there when people have good food and they have that sort of community time, it affects them much differently than people who don't. And we've seen that a lot up there. So it is worth putting some time in. There's a couple of ways that small non-guided parties kind of think about food. In general, I think it's worth bringing some heavier, more nutritious, more calorically dense food, especially for the first part of the trip, because you don't have to haul it up high. So, you know, weight is a huge issue on Denali because you have so many things you have to bring. It's a really hard environment to really pair weight ruthlessly. So you want to do everything you can, but I think food is maybe something that you want to be careful about being ruthless paring down. I am a big fan of things that look and taste like real food, at least early on in the trip. So think about saving those potentially less calorically dense, maybe less tasty things like freeze-dried food for higher on the mountain, and bringing real food for lower on the mountain, certainly.
Let me jump in there, Mark.
Yeah, jump in there.
Is that I usually pack about 7 days worth of what I call heavy food, which is like normal pasta that I cook, and you know, kind of a lot of things that are in this picture here. And let me go to the next picture. And then once after about that first week, I tend to go pretty light. But I supplement with good treats, like you had mentioned, cookies in one of our earlier conversations, chocolates, some of those things. And someone's also mentioning that people give away food on their way down, especially at 14. Well, I want to offer the counter. I've also been at 14 when there was a prolonged storm and the rangers were going around and taking everyone's food and then doling it back out because people were starving. People showed up without enough food. So you cannot count in good weather. yeah, maybe you can go up and you can count on people coming down from the summit and handing off some food, but that's something that you really can't bank on. So go ahead, Mark, talk about the food weight.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two ways to do food. The more organized, and I think the preferable way, is to be super organized about it, break it up into meals, a breakfast and a dinner for each day for the allotted members of your group. And then the other way is sort of more like a free-for-all ration style, where you bring a bunch of different things and you kind of make it up as you go along. Unless you have a lot of experience with that, that tends to go wrong for people. But either way, my sort of like end check is to gather up all the food, and that includes hot drinks, and weigh it and think in terms of like total weight and how many days of food you want to have. So for instance, for a typical West Buttress trip, people might bring up to 20 days of food, and that's kind of what I recommend for folks. And I think a bare minimum of food weight, including lunch food, is around 2 pounds per person per day. So if you're bringing 40 pounds of food per person for a West Buttress trip, you're getting in the ballpark. That would probably be with some lighter food up high, like Steve was talking about. If you're bringing heavier food for the entire time, and it's probably gonna end up being around 2.5 pounds per person per day. If you're getting into the 3.5, you might be a little fat on food. And then one other thing that I get questions a lot from people is about fuel rationing, because obviously that goes hand in hand with food. And
you want to save that for the stove part? Let's wait on
yeah,
that.
we can save the stove part. But that's also a little dependent on how careful you are with the fuel. But yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And also, don't underestimate how much you can drink in hot drinks. So bring both caffeinated and uncaffeinated drinks, instant soups, hot chocolate, things like that. Those go a long ways when you're riding out storms in the cold up there.
Okay, let me address a couple of the questions. I'm not going to address insurance. I wanted to say that insurance is free in the national parks in the United States. So you don't need rescue insurance. It's not like the Alps or some other places. That said, there are fees for climbing Denali. That's kind of a separate issue. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. We don't have time. And somebody asked about the top 3 or 5 mistakes. Well, we're going to cover the top 200 mistakes in the next hour here. So stay tuned. And then we're going to get to stoves and all that here in a second. I want Mark to also talk about the packaging of the food, because I think this is one of the places where inexperienced Denali climbers make a mistake. They don't package their food for caching. You want to talk about that a little bit, Mark?
Yeah, and people think about the food and getting it up there and transporting it around, but they don't think about caching it. And that's why I am a fan of the really organized food, where each breakfast and each dinner is packaged. And then ideally those two things are packaged together. So you have an entire day's food in a self-contained bag. And of course, the bags will be bigger, the bigger your party. This slide happens to be for a guided group that's probably 8 or 10 people. So in each one of those bags is a breakfast and a dinner. Just somewhat counterintuitively for folks, if you're packing these bags somewhat like this, the dinner goes on top, because that's actually one night's dinner and the next morning's breakfast, and then assuming you're going to be moving or something the next day, so that makes it convenient. But you want to be able to cache food in this double carry system that a lot of people use, and if your food isn't super organized, that's hard to do. So if you have, in this case, like in the slide, they have 20 days of food, each labeled with the number with the food bag. And so, if you're at, Ski Hill at the first camp at 8,000 feet and you want to cache all but 3 days of food, then you grab, bags 4 through 20, and that goes in your cache. And it's quite easy to keep organized and to keep things on track. The other thing that I really like to do, and maybe I'm a little bit type A about it, but I have a menu that's written out. And you can see here, Dustin's picture is, can you go, oh, you're forward on the caching. Yep, never mind. So here is a pile of cache food that's waiting to be carried, and you can see the wand to mark it as well. But it's nice to have a menu of what everything is, because the schedule will be weather-based, and some meals are just quicker to fix than others, or more palatable, or maybe you want to grab a dehydrated meal and you have a heavy food meal. And it's nice to just be able to look at a piece of paper and be like, oh, that's in bag 17. I'm just going to grab that right now, and I don't have to think and root through the bags, because by the time you get up there and you get to altitude, you're not going to remember what's in bag 17 versus bag 7 or 11. So it's just good to be organized, have a record of it.
Yeah, you need to stay organized. A notebook is a crucial part of keeping organized. We're going to get into the strategy of the whole caching thing. This will start to make sense. But the main point we wanted to make at this stage is you need to have your food organized and in protective covered bags of some kind. You can use stuffed sacks. You can buy these bags, online. They're I don't even know what they're called, but I'm sure you guys can all Google these types of bags. Things being stolen are not a problem here. So, I've never actually heard of anybody stealing a food cache. So let's go back to the trip sort of in chronological order. One of the things that you have to do is you have to have a permit for climbing Denali that's issued from Denali National Park. And you have to do a briefing with the rangers. We're not going to go into this a ton, but the current requirements are there's a pre-registration that you have to do. You have to do 60 days before you arrive in Talkeetna, before you plan to fly in. You have to do a briefing in person at this ranger station. You have to pay a fee, which is currently $375 for either Denali or climbing Denali or Foraker. Only those two mountains. If you want to go into another place in the park, like the Ruth Gorge or other places, you don't have to, it's not as expensive, and you don't have to do all this as much. You still need to check out and stuff, but yeah. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on the briefing, because the National Park Service website has their information on that, and it's going to change over time as the years go by, and this talk is going to be on YouTube for a while. So Mark, you want to just talk about the success rate and what we're seeing here?
Yeah, this is a board that's still up in the ranger station, where you can read on there. It lists the stats, how many people are registered, how many people are up there, and how many people are down and out. And then they post the summit success rate, which of course everyone is always very keen to look at, based on the number of people who have checked out. And you can see in this particular season, which is actually quite typical at this point, Foraker had a handful of contestants, none of which who went to the top, and Denali has had actually quite a few people check out. This is a little later in the season. At 40, you can see 48%, but it's very typical that Denali sees right about a 50% summit success rate. Depending on when you check in, if you go in late May, and not many people have signed out and not people summited, like I checked in one year and the summit success rate was 2%. Then everyone's all sad. And then when we checked out, it was 57%, because a bunch of people had summited during my time up there. So don't worry about it too much, but do understand that it is a trying mountain, and the weather has a big say in it. And 50% is not that high. Like there is a good chance you're going to go up and not summit. So, and
they used to break it out by guided and non-guided parties. And in that, you would see that the guided parties would typically have about a 60% success rate, and the non-guided parties would typically have about a 40% success rate. A lot of that is due to these miscalculations people make because they don't have the experience up there. There was a good question about the seasons, May versus June. Let me just summarize it this way, and Mark, you can agree or disagree or add. But my feeling is May is colder, and windier. June is warmer and snowier. So what that means is June has less days with good visibility. May has a little more visibility days, but it's colder for those two reasons. Typically for skiing later in the season is better. Also because you're wearing ski boots, which are not as warm. If you bring ski boots, you definitely need to upsize them and have super warm like liners, and you need to probably consider some sort of overboot system if you're trying to go very above 14. We'll talk more about skis in a second. But personally, I prefer to go in June. I just find it more pleasant. May is a little more work. There's less people on the mountain. That can be nice if you like that. You know, the weather is the weather. It can be bad and it can be good anytime. Those are really the only 2 months you can climb Denali. There are anomalies where people will climb in late April. People will obviously climb it in winter. Some people will climb it in July, which frankly I think is a little nuts because the crevasse hazard is so high. So yeah, the latest I've ever been on the mountain, I think I've flown off maybe July 1st or 2nd or 3rd or something like that in, I don't know, like many trips, literally dozens of trips. And Mark, you can add anything to the seasonal question. It's always, this has been debated for thousands of hours around thousands of campfires, but
yeah, I think that's exactly right, Steve. Like May is quieter. So for people that want a little more of a wilderness experience to the extent that it will be, May can be great for that. It is cold for sure. And typically the crevasse navigation on the lower glacier is not as formidable in May. It can be pretty mellow getting in and out of there in May. If I was skiing, I would for sure come in June. Probably, yeah, you know, thinking roughly like starting June 1st through the 5th or something like that. Yeah, June is a snowier month for sure.
Statistically, there's a lot more stormy weather in June. That's also why it's snowier. So
yeah, for sure.
We're not even going to talk about winter season. Like, sorry, somebody's asking about that.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about winter season, then that's a whole nother question.
Yeah, I think June's the best month to climb it in the winter, in my opinion.
Yeah, there you go. That's the answer. Okay, let's keep moving because we got a lot to cover here. We're on slide 20 of 120, and we're already over 30 minutes into this. So this is going to take a while. So this is your best friend in Denali. This is an airplane with skis on it. And we just want to talk about this a little bit because, this is absolutely not only crucial to the trip, but it's also one of the coolest parts of going up there is flying in to the glacier. It's also one of the biggest expenses that you incur in this trip. This is not cheap to fly onto the glacier anymore. I won't tell you when I first went, I will tell you, when I first went up there, it was $125 to fly to the base camp. I think it's like $1,000 now or something. So anyway, Mark, do you want to add anything about this? We got a couple planes.
No, I think this is an amazing part of the trip. And I actually think these planes are super cool. They're predominantly now these otters, these turbine conversion otters. These are actually jet engine turboprops. They've been converted, and so these planes were built. Most of them were built in the late 50s and early 60s, and then they've had this kind of turbine conversion, which almost doubles the horsepower, and they're amazing machines. So I think it's just a super cool part of the trip.
It's also a part that deserves a lot of respect. You got to be really gentle and really careful around these machines. They're very expensive, and these pilots are very particular about their machines. So you want to, these people with the vests here that are loading the machines, you only do or hand them something when they tell you to. So you give those pilots and those people that are working on and around the aircraft the respect they deserve, because these are that's my spiel about the pilot.
The only other thing I would add to this is this is a point in the trip where the weather is in control. You haven't even, you haven't left town yet, and the weather's already in control of your trip. So for people that are familiar with flying, when they're landing on a glacier, they're operating under visual flight rules. They can't fly in instruments in any way. So they have a minimum ceiling and distance that they have to be able to see to land on the glacier. So it's not uncommon that it'll be like it'll be a day like this in Talkeetna, and they're not flying because the visibility is horrible in the rain. So be prepared for that possibility and just be patient. And I've flown in there and out of there a couple times in pretty marginal weather. And believe me, if they do not want to fly you in there, you do not want to be flown in there. So yeah, just be patient and realize both in and out, weather delays are a very real possibility.
Yeah, I've waited in Talkeetna 7 days is my record. And I think for flying out from the glacier, my record is waiting 8 days. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. You are at their mercy. But it is awesome. Here's a longtime pilot and TAT owner, Paul Roderick here, the wheels of one of the Beavers. Great machines. And it is just a lot of fun. So, Mark, you want to introduce these two characters, particularly Lisa?
Yeah, this is actually Paul again, and his sister Lisa Roderick. So Lisa is currently the base camp manager, and so she lives on the glacier in base camp for the entire Denali climbing season. And her role is to manage the air taxi services. So she's basically the eyes and ears for the pilots on the ground, so that she's in communication with Talkeetna and lets them know what the conditions are, so whether it's okay to fly in or not. And she is also your contact person when you land, and she's your contact person when you want to fly out. So she's a good person to get to know and be nice to. Especially when you land, it's pretty straightforward. Like, you gather your fuel, you're on your way. But when you come back, of course, you've had a long trip, whatever's happened, and you're keen to get home. But I think it's important to understand that Lisa lives there. So she does not necessarily want to be woken up at 2 a.m. every night, so that you can get on the list to fly out the following morning. So she has hours posted on her little Quonset hut there, and try and respect those hours. And just steer clear of her during the night, and she'll get you on the list and get you out of there in the morning. And also don't pace around in front of her tent, because the crunchy snow is noisy and wakes her up. But she's awesome.
Lisa is great, and it's another person here that you will do well to be super nice to her, to befriend her, bring her a gift, bring her some fresh fruit. I don't know,
fresh fruit and a magazine.
Yeah, she's pretty well stocked up there because all the pilots also want to be on her good side. She's a powerful person in your world while you're there, so you want to take good care of her. So this is a early season view. This is actually looking up above base camp. This isn't quite at base camp, but this is basically where you land on the southeast fork of the Kahiltna Glacier, below Mount Hunter. That's the North Buttress of Mount Hunter there. And this is looking down the airstrip. You can see a plane just taking off. You can see here some marker. These are actually just plastic kiddie sleds buried in the snow to give the pilots some visual reference to the slope as they take off and land. One last thing I want to mention here before we leave base camp is it's a very good idea. In fact, I think it's mandatory. You want to have a cache in base camp. So if you come down from the mountain and you're out of food, that you have a way to eat. I typically plan on, roughly a week. I've been stuck there for 8 days before. So it's not too much to have a week's worth of food. I mean, if it went that long, Lisa would start consolidating everyone's food, and there's a couple rangers there, and they probably have a lot. But you need at least a minimum of 3 days of food. You need to bury it in a big hole. You need to put a really long cache wand on it that's very clearly marked. So, you know, if you're up on the upper mountain for 3 weeks during June, the glacier is going to melt down easily, you know, a meter. So you need to have that thing buried deep in the snow. And Lisa has there's a special area at base camp where everybody makes their caches. So that's another thing that a lot of climbers don't think about that can be very important. Mark, you want to lead? Oh, I guess I need to do this because I have the cursor, don't I?
Yeah, you have a cursor.
So this is a panorama taken from, where is this, Mark? Is it from Crossan or from Foraker?
It's somewhere on Foraker. This is Josh's photo during his successful guided ascent of the Sultana. So I assume it's fairly high. It almost looks like the corner crossing.
Right here is where the base camp is. This is Mount Hunter, just give a little orientation. So this is where you land. The planes land going upslope on the glacier here. That's probably the airstrip, that mark right there. So when you climb the first day of the trip is coming down. This is called Heartbreak Hill because you're brokenhearted when you have to climb this big hill and you come back when you're coming back. You got to go down Heartbreak to the main Kahiltna Glacier here, come up the main Kahiltna Glacier. This is the east fork of the Kahiltna where you go to parts of the south face of Denali. This is the northeast fork where you go to the West Rib and the Cassine routes. And the main West Buttress route comes up here. I'll point out just real briefly, this is roughly the 8,000 foot camp location. The 11,000 foot camp is kind of hidden here. This is Windy Corner. This is the plateau where the 14,000 foot camp is. This is the head wall where you climb the fixed ropes. The 16,000 foot level is about here. This black hump in the back is actually the north summit of Denali. And then the high camp for Denali is roughly right about there on this shoulder. It just blends in with the north summit there. And then this is the main summit of Denali right there. So beautiful, beautiful country. But that gives you a little outline as to how the route looks. Here's a slightly different picture that I took from the top of Mount Foraker. Again, here's the east fork of the Kahiltna, the northeast fork. The 8,000 foot camp is roughly here, and it's a little foreshortened. You can't tell, but there's a mountain. See this ridge? There's a mountain called Mount Crossan in front here. So you're actually behind Mount Crossan here. Up to, this is the 10,000 foot level of the West Buttress route. You turn a corner, and the 11,000 foot camp is basically right below this sunshade line, right below, or actually, no, sorry, I think I've got it wrong. Do you think it's here, right, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's there.
This is that other little valley. So the 11,000 foot camp would be down in here. This would be what we're going to talk about. This would be called Motorcycle Hill. You go along this ridge. There's a hill called Squirrel Hill we're going to talk about. There's an area called the Polo Field we're going to talk about, which is right here. This is Windy Corner right here, 14,000 foot camp. You can see actually a trail of where the fixed lines are right there in this image. 16,000 foot. High camp is right here in the sunny spot, and the main summit is over here. This is the West Rib feature, and this is the Cassine Ridge right here. Okay, so just a little bit of to get you oriented, and one more like that just has this drawn in for you. This picture is really foreshortened. It's taken with a telephoto, so it's much farther up this glacier. I think this is around 6 miles or something than it shows here. And Mark, why don't you just take us through sort of a standard itinerary that we've agreed upon that, kind of would recommend for folks.
Yeah, so people's way of approaching it differs, but the sort of what's become a somewhat normal itinerary let's go through the whole thing pretty quickly.
I'll use the cursor to kind of guide us along.
Yeah, the first day from base camp to Camp 1 is long. Like Steve said, it's probably between 5 and 6 miles, but it's actually pretty flat in the scheme of things. You start at 7,200. You actually go down. The low point is between 6,700 and 6,800, and then you go up the glacier to about 7,800. So you only gain about 1,000 feet from the low point. So it's common that people single carry that, which I do think is the thing to do. But understand that you have it's as heavy as you're going to be. You have every bit of food and fuel with you still at that point. So it is a heavy day. Single carry to there commonly. Some parties will double carry that. So you might consider that if you're on the slow program and you want to acclimate and you're concerned about the weight, but single carry to camp 1. And then that's when people typically will start double carrying. A common tactic is to take all but a couple of days, maybe 3 days of food and fuel from camp 1 up to about the 10,000 foot level. Right there below Kahiltna Pass, and cache it. And then come back and sleep in camp 1 again that night. So that's day 2. Day 3 then would be pick up all your stuff and move all the way to 11, walking past the cache. And then camp at 11, then back carry from that 10,000 foot cache, or run down the morning and grab it, bring it up to 11. So that's kind of a half day. That's actually a pretty easy day. And the move to 11 day is a little bit strenuous. So that gives you like another acclimatization night and kind of an active rest day. And then to me, this is where you need to think about the weather a little more, because you want to ideally put a cache in on the far side of Windy Corner. So sort of the next agenda would be to cache food and fuel on the far side, come back down, sleep at 11 again, so you have at least 3 nights there, and then move to the 14,000 foot camp the following day. But what that requires is 2 days of pretty decent weather, because you have to obviously get around the corner to put in the cache, and you need to get around the corner to move the next day. This is where I'm a little more conservative sometimes about how much I cache, because it would be possible in a worst case scenario to put a big fat cache in up there, come back down, and then get hammered by weather and not be able to get back around the corner to get to it. So you want to be a little bit thoughtful. I don't just save 1 or 2 days of food at this point. I generally reserve 3 or maybe even 4 days of food and fuel at this point if I don't trust the weather. There's a kind of famous story that is probably at least partially true of Mug Stump guiding a West Buttress trip, where he got to 11, cached a fair amount, ran out of food and fuel, and had to go home. And that was the high point of the entire trip. So I don't know if that's strictly gospel, but at least it's a good story. So be thoughtful about caching there. And then you move to 14. You can then run down to the corner and pick up your cache. So now you've got all your groceries at 14, and things are starting to look pretty good here. The move to 14 day, and we'll talk about this later, is kind of hard. So you might think about a rest day the following day, but now you're the trip is really rolling and very weather dependent, but now your goal is to put in a cache up on the 16 ridge, probably a fairly light cache, as high up the ridge as you can get it, come back down to 14, sleep there, get rested. Ideally, you're going to spend something on the order of at least 4 nights at 14. And then as soon as you think the weather is appropriate, you move to high camp, probably picking up that cache en route. And then there's sort of 2 strategies after the move to high camp. If you had a fairly reasonable move day and everyone was able to get to bed, get hydrated, get to bed early, get some sleep, and everyone's feeling decent, and the next day is nice, it's pretty hard to pass up a really nice summit day on Denali if everyone's feeling good. If the weather's not good, for sure, but if you've had a really hard move to 17 day, which is not unheard of by any means, you might consider a rest day in high camp and getting hydrated, getting your act together, and then having a good go a little more rested the following day on summit day. So that's a pretty standard good weather itinerary. In general, the weather has a say in that as soon as you get on the glacier. And there are weather days somewhere in there, usually at 11, waiting to get around the corner, very commonly at 14. I think I sat at 14 for 11 days one trip waiting to go up the fixed lines. So the weather's a big factor up there. And in some ways it's a blessing in small amounts because you get nice and acclimated. But after a while, of course, it's a curse and you just want to get on with it. So the double carry works well. It keeps people from overdoing it with the weight, and it also provides chances to acclimate in these different camps an extra night.
Yeah, I just want to address a couple of questions that came through. You know, if you're really fit and strong and light, you have to be light to do this, meaning you have to like be on the suffer program. You can do more single carrying up to 14. You have to be really fit to do that though. I think most people will have, you know, the hardest part of the climb of this whole thing is above 14. So if you get to 14 and you're smoked, the rest of the trip is not going to work out too well. You're not going to recover very much at 14,000 foot camp. So think about a strategy that works for you and your team that allows your entire team to get to 14 feeling good. That's the strategy that's going to be right for you. There's a million different ways to do this, honestly. And I've done a bunch of them, and Mark has done a bunch of them, and so forth. Yeah, that's, I think, the overall arching thing that you should decide. Sleds don't go above 14, and in some cases, people don't take them above 11. It kind of depends. It's just kind of a personal decision. And I just want to say that, to my knowledge, the Cassine has never been successfully guided. I've tried it once, a few other people. It may have been successfully guided illegally, meaning without a permit, but I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. So here's a picture of a cache. Let's talk about caches just again for a second. They need to be at least, you know, this deep. This is like a legitimate amount of, you know, depth. You need to have a list of everything that goes in there. You need to have a wand well marked. You're going to need to make a waypoint with your GPS. Some people will even take avalanche transceivers and put them in the cache and leave them turned on. Of course, have one to find it later. And this is, let me just show you what a wand looks like. This is kind of a typical wand. There's the Park Service actually gives you an official label in addition to your team name. You'll have to have a team name. And now those labels have to be on your wands as well. Usually most people will take a bunch of these bamboo wands and tape them together into these long sections. And you can, when you're there, just look around at what other people are doing. I've also used avalanche probes to make great markers. But I've also, you know, had it happen where I've been up on the upper mountain and come back down to 11 for my cache and had to dig 6 feet down to find my wand, to find the wand. I'm not talking about finding the cache. I mean, it can snow a lot up there. So you got to be really conservative with these things. The weather's great, you know, your cache melt, you know, it's easy to find your cache, great, but it can happen. Let's talk about sleds for a minute, Mark. We haven't gotten into sleds. Do you want to talk about just kind of rigging sleds and how to have that dialed, and maybe a bit about the weight distribution as well? This is a big topic for the West Buttress folks.
This is a big topic. We could almost talk about sleds for an hour. Sleds are something that's a little bit unique to Denali. Unless you've done a lot, you know, other Arctic camping, other Arctic environments, a lot of people just haven't used the sled because it's not very useful for climbing in a lot of other ways. It's super good for Denali because it allows you to move weight around efficiently on the snow, lower on the glacier where it's not super steep. The thing is, it also can be a hindrance. They're awkward. If you were to fall in a crevasse, it's a projectile that comes in after you, and they can be a little bit unruly. So in general, this kind of general rule of thumb is to put half the weight in the sled and half in your pack. On the lower glacier at first, when it's flatter, I actually put a little more weight in the sled than in my pack. And at each day, as you're getting higher and the terrain is also getting steeper, I put more in my backpack and less in my sled until going around Windy Corner, which would probably be the last day you're using the sled, more like 70-30, 70 in my pack, 30 in my sled. The sled is commonly rigged to a piece of webbing that's tied through your backpack where the waist belt goes through. That's nice and structural. And I attach mine with a locked-in carabiner, just because sometimes the sled is kind of becoming slack and then taut and slack and then taut, and they can unclip themselves. And of course, you don't want to lose whatever it is you happen to have in your sled, which has happened on Denali with a runaway sled. So I like to clip mine on with a locker. And then commonly, which is not the case in this picture, certainly everyone who's not in the back, and then sometimes this person is in the back, want to attach the sled structurally to the rope, so that it prevents that scenario where it gets away from you. But also, if you're the front or the middle person and you were to fall in a crevasse, it prevents the sled from coming in after you. So as you can actually see pretty well in this picture, there's a prusik on the back of the sled. And if I'm the middle or commonly the front person, I use that prusik to attach it to the climbing rope. I think that's a good way to go. You can also clove hitch into the carabiner, for sure. So also have a fairly lightweight, ideally kind of long and skinny duffel bag to use on the sled, so that the weight sits kind of low. You see a lot of people with big, fat, tall duffel bags to drag around, and those do work, but it makes the sled a little more tippy. So kind of have a plan for that moving forward that works well.
Yeah, I'd say that there's a whole art to packing the sled and distributing the weight. Like Mark said, the key points are having the weight center of gravity as low as possible in the sled. And then also what I do is if the snow is soft, I put a little more weight in my backpack. And if the snow is hard, I put a little bit more weight in the sled, because then it's sliding easily. So we'll continue to talk about sleds. It's a big topic. There's a lot of information out there. You kind of have to have it. You kind of have to deal with it at least to 11. Even when I've been up there on really lightweight trips, I've ended up, it's just easier to use a sled. It works. It's the only place I've ever climbed where I've used a sled, just FYI. But it does have its place and does really work well here. So now we're getting to the part of the slideshow where we're actually going to start up the mountain finally. So
we have 2 minutes.
Yeah, we got 2 minutes left. So we're going to just keep soldiering on. I know a lot of people will have to clock out for other things. We're going over an hour already. We're on slide 35 of 120, but we'll just keep soldiering on, and we'll put it all on YouTube, and you guys can check it out later if you have to go. So at this point, I just want to point this out. These people are leaving base camp, and I just want to point out how happy they look. This is typical kind of how people look when they're leaving base camp. They're still kind of all psyched. He's still clean. He doesn't have that much sunscreen on his face. He doesn't look tired yet. He hasn't had any bad night's sleep, all that stuff. This is the last time he's going to look like that for a while. One of the challenges is that you start off going downhill. And this is one of the places where if you're on snowshoes, for most people, it's much easier. If you're on skis and you haven't skied with the sled before, this first hill is going to teach you a lesson. You're probably going to end up on your face multiple times. So just keep that in mind. This is something where if you can get out somewhere in a snowy environment and practice it with your team, traveling together on a rope with big backpacks of actual weight, with big sleds of actual weight, and you can just practice walking around, I highly recommend that you do that. Okay, so this is the lower glacier. Why don't you talk a little bit about the timing question on the lower glacier, Mark, and the schedules. There's kind of two schedules you can take here.
For sure. And this is also a little bit timing dependent on the season that you go. For very early, if you go early May or even middle of May, depending on conditions and condition on the glacier, you might be able to move around on the glacier in the middle of the day. But what's very typical is that people will go to a night or a quasi-night schedule initially on the glacier, kind of for two reasons. One, obviously the glacier freezes at night. Although it doesn't get dark, the sun does go down behind the ridge, so the the glacier, lower glacier is not getting any direct sunlight, and it's at its darkest point in the night. And the glacier does freeze and firm up most nights. So the crevasse fall hazard is lower, and just the traveling is easier. The surface is slipperier to pull the sled across. But as big, or almost a bigger reason to do that is it's really hot on the lower glacier in the blazing sun. There's so much reflectivity off the snow surface, and you're working hard. You have a big backpack on and a lot of clothing, and boots that are far too warm for the job at this point. That people actually really struggle sometimes just on the first day, and it's not even so much the difficulty of the climbing, it's the heat. So it's easy to get sucked into a day schedule because people will commonly fly in the late morning. They land on the glacier at noon and they're chomping at the bit, and they've been training for 18 months and they want to go. But I caution people about that. And I think it's much better just to set up camp there in base camp, get some sleep. And then what I like to do is get up at, 1 in the morning, let's say 1 or 2 in the morning, pack up what little you need to from your minimal camp, and then leave camp at 3 in the morning, something like that. And then move on that glacier from, 3 a.m. to, let's say, 8 a.m. would be a typical scenario to get to Ski Hill. And that kind of keeps you on a quasi day schedule. Obviously you're getting up super early, but it also enables you to travel in the coldest part of the night with the easiest conditions. And then what I do is each subsequent day after that, I ratchet it back a couple hours. So if I've gotten up at 1 a.m., let's say the first morning, the next morning I get up at 3, maybe the next morning 4, next morning 5. And then so by the time you're at like 11 and you're looking to move to 14, you've kind of ratcheted that back to more of a traditional day schedule, which is more appropriate for conditions up there.
And really, this is most important on this move from base camp to the base of Ski Hill. And this is another place where a lot of people who don't have experience specific to Denali, I think, make a mistake by going just in the middle of the day. So, yeah, it's strange not to bring a headlamp on a trip. I know. The first time it was. So this is just a view of this is what it looks like going up the glacier. And I also use this picture because this is a pretty typical track condition. You can see there's a little fresh snow, but there's enough traffic on this route that there's typically a pretty good trail. Enough sleds have been drug over this, enough people with skis, enough people with snowshoes. I mean, you can't walk on this probably with just boots and no skis or snowshoes. You need some snow flotation, but you can travel pretty well. And this is also typical where you'll see like multiple trails through these little crevassed sections. You have to decide for yourself which is better. And then this is what we're talking about, Ski Hill and the camp, 8,000-foot camp. This is the northeast fork of the Kahiltna Glacier here, and the camp is roughly where this confluence of these two glaciers is. This is Kahiltna Pass. Here, again, Windy Corner. Here, the 14,000-foot camp. And as Mark pointed out yesterday when we were looking at these pictures, you can this is good because you're not missing a summit day when you've got a bit lenticular cloud on the summit like that. So then we're going to talk a little bit. We showed you this picture earlier, but we want to talk about cook tents because this is one of the things that all the guide services use and almost none of the private non-guided groups use. And I think this is one of the big mistakes people make, especially for groups of larger than about 3 people. Do you want to walk us through a little bit about your experience with cook tents, Mark?
Yeah, I think that the cook tent is a really an important piece of the puzzle. This happens to be a Black Diamond Mega Mid, which is a really common kind of tent to bring. There's a couple other similar sort of pyramid shaped products, floorless flies to use for a cook tent. And it allows you to have a separate area to cook and really set it up so that it's ergonomic. You can stand and cook comfortably. It's much easier on your back than vestibule cooking. It provides a communal space for people to gather. It allows you to have a little bit of separation. even, assuming it's not super stormy, you can usually keep the tent up. And so you're not just stuck in the same tent looking at each other the whole time. And then the other thing that I think it does is it separates your cooking from your sleeping. And I think that carbon monoxide is underestimated on Denali. I think that everybody has a certain amount of carbon monoxide poisoning when they're climbing Denali. And obviously you want to minimize that because that competes with how much oxygen your red blood cells can carry. So I think it's important to use a cook tent and keep it well ventilated, and it keeps you from breathing as much carbon monoxide. So I think it's key. And as Steve said, yeah, if I was one climbing partner and we had a fairly, we took a 3-person mountaineering tent that had a fairly roomy vestibule, I would consider maybe not bringing a cook tent. But for sure 3 and certainly 4 people in my team, I would definitely bring a Megamid and dig out a nice kitchen at each camp. And you're not going to bring it to high camp. So realistically, you only have 3 camps. Then you have one at 8, one at 11, and one at 14. So it's not that much work to dig out 3 camps worth of cook tents in a 20-day trip.
I also want to just add to that, like the last time I was up there with just a climbing partner, it was just 2 of us, and we brought a Black Diamond First Light tent and a Megamid. And when the weather was nice, one of us slept out in the Megamid and one slept in the First Light. When it was bad, we both got in the First Light. So there's a lot of variations you could do. Here's a pro tip for you. You always collapse your tent at night and when you leave. You don't leave this thing standing up when you're gone because they will get destroyed if the wind and the weather comes up while you're gone. Yep. So I want to talk now about stoves. This kind of leads us into stoves and a bunch of the stuff. This is another thing where there's a lot to know, a lot to learn, and this is one of the most important things about climbing Denali. We're big fans of MSR whisper lights. I saw somebody ask about an XGK before. I've done trips with XGKs, multiple XGKs, and my hearing is still not recovered. So it just gets on your nerve. It's, it's not a safety issue, but it's really nice to have a quiet stove because you're running these stoves a lot. When I've been on guided trips, I figure as a guide, I'm running stoves 6 hours a day, just running stoves, melting water, and cooking. Okay, it's a huge component of this. So this is one of the tricks that I think a lot of people don't know is that you can, of course, the manufacturer is not going to tell you to do this, but you can put multiple whisper lights together, 2 and 3, and put a large pot under them, and that's the fastest way to melt a large amount of water. A big pot like this one is really key. You may not be melting water for 8 people, but even for 3 or 4 people, having one big pot, 2 things. It needs to be big. It should be aluminum because aluminum conducts heat the best, and it should be only used for water and nothing else ever. So you don't have to clean it. And your water doesn't start tasting like ramen because that's nothing will kill your appetite more than, or your thirst impulse more than water that tastes like ramen. So so that's key. Also want to say a couple other things, and I'll let Mark talk about this more, but windscreens and stove boards are super, super important. So here's another thing I wanted to add was I'm a big fan of the thermos bottles. I typically bring one 1 liter thermos and one 1 liter Nalgene or some other kind of bottle for my water. Mark, you want to tell us a little bit about your some stove board tips? I think that's one of the other unsung.
Yeah, the stove board becomes a super important piece up there because obviously your countertop, however that looks, whether it's in your vestibule or in your cook tent, is on snow. And let alone the heat from the stove, but just the radiation coming through the tent, heating the metal up. Anything metal will melt into the snow and eventually tip over or become problematic. So you need kind of a non-metal surface touching the snow. And there's a couple different variations in these different pictures, but there are some commercially available things, but most people end up making a stove board. And at a minimum, a piece of, lightweight 1/4-inch plywood cut to the shape that you want. Ideally,
There's one with the
with
plywood you can see under here.
Yep. Ideally with a thin sheet of aluminum on top of it. And if you're trying to be extra stylish, polyurethaning the plywood really helps its longevity because it won't absorb moisture.
I don't
and
see any of
easily.
these with the foam underneath, but yeah, I'm a big fan of a layer of foam epoxied underneath a piece of plywood. And another tip is I make it the shape that I can put it in the bottom of my sled, and I can also put it into my backpack, one of them into my backpack for moving up to high camp. And you'll probably this will probably only last one trip. They don't last that long, especially just the plywood ones, because you burn them.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point is having something that's big enough to use and is useful, but also something that's small enough to take up to high camp, if that's your plan. And some people actually have two. They have like a big, really nice one they bring up all the way up to 14, and then they have another smaller one that they use in conjunction with that, and then maybe just the smaller one goes up to high camp. So have a plan for what your stove board scene is going to look like at those two contingencies.
Let's jump back to this picture and talk about fuel for a second. One of the mistakes I think especially climbers coming from Europe make is they try to do this trip with isobutane canister stoves, which are the normal stove you would use in the Alps or something. Just do yourself a favor and go to Alaska the store in Anchorage called what is
AMH?
it?
AMH?
AMH, Alaska Mountaineering and Hiking, and buy yourself one or two of these Whisper Light stoves. They're not that expensive. White gas is the standard fuel up there. It's what almost everybody uses, and it's also almost a currency. So you can get traded around. You get it when you fly in. If you pay for it through the air taxi, but they fly it in bulk beforehand. You're not actually allowed to fly with those canisters or the white gas from Talkeetna into base camp. So they fly all the fuel in at the beginning of the season, and you give Lisa this card that tells you how many gallons or how many canisters or whatever you're have, and then she gives you what you've paid for. So I'm a big fan of white gas in this scenario. I use isobutane canister stoves for virtually everything else, but in Denali, in Alaska, you want to run white gas. It's just gonna be a lot better. So on terms of, and there's Mark, you can jump in if you have another thing, but in terms of planning the amount of fuel, so I'm going to use American measurements since I'm an American, but it's 6 ounces per person per day is on the light side. 8 ounces per person per day is on the heavy side. So somewhere right in there, you can use that basis as a calculation to figure out how much fuel you need to bring. You need to drink a lot. Your cook, the actual amount may vary on what kind of food you're cooking and a whole bunch of things, how many hot drinks you want to have, whether or not you want to be stressed about it or just not be stressed about it. But having enough fuel is something good. Yeah, I'm not even going to talk about other fuel types. If you're going to Denali, just bring white. You're going to want to use white gas. So there's no other game in town up here. It's what you need to do. I have brought sometimes both, like I've brought maybe for a lower altitude. I'm not talking about climbs in the Ruth Gorge or other places. We're just talking about Denali. We're just talking about the West Buttress. You want to use white gas. Anything else to add to that, Mark, or my fuel?
No, I would say I like your fuel calculations per person per day. What that ends up being for most folks is most of a gallon per person, but not quite. So in a small climbing party, let's say you have 2, 3, or 4 people, you're going to end up bringing a gallon a person because ultimately you have to round to the nearest gallon. In a big party, you'll end up a little bit less than that. But yeah, a party of 4 climbing West Buttress, you're going to bring 4 gallons of fuel is the way it ends up being. And
you got to drink a lot up here. And it's, staying hydrated on the lower glacier is hard because it's hot. Staying hydrated up high is difficult because it's really cold and it's hard to make water out of snow. It takes a lot of fuel, it takes a lot of energy. So, you'll notice that it's much faster to make water out of snow down at 11 than it is up at 17. Up at 17, it just takes way longer. It's way colder. Yeah. Yeah. So one more thing just about the cook tent. This was another shot. The cook tent is important, I think, also just for morale. This is maybe not your whole climbing team. You're going to make friends up there. They're going to want to come over and hang out, have hot drinks. You're going to have rest days. You're going to have down days.
Yeah, I think foot care is a huge issue. And one of the problems is that most foot problems are initially, I think, heat problems. Because it's actually pretty warm on the lower glacier, and your boots are appropriate for much colder temperatures you're going to encounter higher on the mountain. So your feet, your socks, your liners, and your feet all get wet. And when they get wet, they're soft, and that leads to all the other issues like blistering that you're going to see. So keeping your feet dry whenever that's possible, which is usually in the evening and at night, is super important. So I think of it in a couple of ways. I think of getting out of my boots whenever possible so that my liners can dry. And here's a good example. Like, this person has their feet drying in the sun, their liners and socks are hanging up in the tent and drying from the radiation. That's super key. But I also like to think of the fact that you're keeping your feet dry, not so they just don't blister, but then your skin is just tougher for the next day. So you want to really be thinking always about, okay, do I need to have my boots on right now? Is this an appropriate time that I can get out of them and have them be drying? So if it's not your night to cook, if there's nothing to be done in camp, etc., get out of your boots, have your things be hanging and drying. And then we can touch on this later, but really, once the sun is down, the only way to dry things is to sleep with them. So if your liners aren't completely dry, if the insoles aren't completely dry, for sure your socks, you want to sleep with those every night, so that at least every morning you want to be putting on dry socks and dry liners for the next day. That should be your goal every day. And that gets more and more important as you go up the mountain. So I like to bring several pairs of socks. I actually bring 4, but it's nice to rotate sometimes those socks every other day. So each night you put on a pair of dry socks, and then you wear a pair during the day, and then you rotate those and dry them out. So every day you have a nice dry pair of socks. The other alternative is to have a pair that's dedicated 100% to sleeping, and then you try and dry the day pair every day until they just get too nasty to wear, and then you break out your next pair. And then always save a dry, clean pair for summit day. I have a pair that I haven't worn. They're in a Ziploc, and I break them out for summit day just so that I'm sure that my feet are going to be as warm as possible with a dry, fluffy, clean pair of socks to start out on summit day. You have anything to add to the foot discussion, Steve?
No, I think that's great. It's super important. And this is also the reason that Mark's talking about it. You have a lot of time to dry stuff on this mountain. And typically, if the weather's good, you're having time in the afternoon when the sun's out to dry sleeping bags, dry down parkas. So this is one of the places where down actually works really well for sleeping bags and parkas. I want to mention that because you could dry stuff out. Okay, let's go to the next picture here. Okay, you want to talk about this for a second, Mark? What are we seeing here?
Oh man, people love to talk about this. So these are clean mountain cans. This is your toilet on the mountain, and you'll get issued these cans at the ranger station at your briefing in the beginning. So these are plastic cans that will house all the solid waste from your trip. You, in general, have to carry these up and then down and fly out with them. They're encouraging everybody to carry all waste off the mountain. So the way that you treat these and the cleanliness is super important because they're going to be with you for quite a while. You can cache them on the way up and carry them down, so you don't have to literally carry them all the way up and all the way down. But it's worth a little time to create a toilet facility. This is like a quasi igloo scene here that's dedicated. Try and keep the toilet scene as compact as possible. You're also obviously gathering snow for drinking water at all these camps. So I like to create my toilet on kind of one end of camp and then go collect snow at the far other end of my little probed out camp when I'm set up in these camps, just as kind of a general way to do business. And then the other piece of this is that if I'm working around the toilet and either initially building it or particularly like clearing storm snow, I have a shovel that I work with for camp and in the toilet area. And I have a different shovel that is clearly marked. That's my water gathering shovel. So that, and I think it's an obvious concept, but so that you're not clearing snow from your toilet igloo with the same shovel that you're collecting drinking water snow with. So I like to mark the water shovel with some colored tape so that shovel never does basically anything but that, except in case of emergency. And the other thing I find with these toilet systems is they're going to be lined with a plastic bag. They give you the bags. If that bag's just going to live in there and never come out, then that's great. But there is currently a crevasse at 14 camp that at least last year, they were letting people crevasse human waste. So if you're going to be pulling that bag out of there to go throw it in a crevasse or do anything else with it, those bags tend to freeze in there. And the last thing that you want to do is have that bag rip apart while you're trying to pull it out, which happens. So what I do is I double line the bags. You put two bags inside the CMC can so that it's much easier to extract one if that's your goal at some point. Yeah, they go into the in-depth in the ranger briefing.
Yeah. A lot of your ranger briefings could be about this, so we don't need to spend too much more time. Just be aware that you're going to have to deal with this, and it's a major part of the logistics.
And a major part of the fun.
Yeah, major part of the fun. The other thing I would recommend people is bring a bunch of rubber gloves, like medical gloves, when you do have to deal with it. I just like to put those on. They're super light. You only need a few pounds, a few pairs, like 6 pairs or something. I wanted to mention, the booties question I saw earlier. That's a good point. I really like to have some kind of, it's really key to get out of your climbing boots whenever you can. So having some sort of like like synthetic booty that you can put on when you're in the tent, and then you can slip into your outer boots for, going over to cook or something is really nice. So there's another picture. I'm going to keep moving because this is taking a lot longer than we had planned. Battery heaters don't work. There's no way to recharge your batteries up there. Just going up the glacier, it can be, real hot. You have a lot of stuff. It can be overwhelming. A lot of people get demoralized these first few days because it's a lot harder than they think. Here's some people going back down, carrying their sleds after having cached at, looks like the 10,000 foot camp, going back down Ski Hill to the 11,000 foot camp. I want to say one word about skiing versus snowshoeing. You have to be an expert skier to ski here. If you're an intermediate skier, absolutely do not try to come up here with skis. You'll probably get hurt. This is a picture of the 11,000 foot camp. And I just want, if you look at this in YouTube later, note mentally where this is. This is pretty high in generally the locations that people choose at the 11,000 foot camp, and this is the right place to camp. Down lower, where a lot of the camps end up, is fairly crevassed in my experience. So you want to be a little bit up on Ski Hill, just a touch. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I like to camp right at the base of Ski Hill. Just right where it goes from
right
flat
at the base of the ski hill,
yep.
Where the best compression is from the glacier. That's where these guys are. And you can see the trail goes up this way. Hilton Pass is up here. And this is the Northeast Fork here. And then this person is walking down to pick up a cache, probably around, this is Hilton Pass here, and they're walking down, this is the 10,000 foot level, just right down here between the 10 and 11,000 foot camps. This is the little scene at the 11,000 foot camp. This is kind of the last kind of low glacier camp, I'd say. Once you get above this, you feel like you're really on a big mountain. Here, you don't have a lot of views yet. It's not that cold yet. This is another camp that has crevasses within the camp, and you want to do a good job of probing your area where you're going to set up. This is also where you're going to switch to crampons. You're going to leave snowshoes here. Some people may bring skis higher, but again, like there's probably no logistical benefit. It's only a fun benefit. Like there is some good skiing above 14, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there's, to me, no logistical benefit to bringing your skis up higher. No significant benefit. Here's Mark. Sorry, I've been talking for a few slides. Why don't you talk us up Motorcycle Hill here? That's looking back down Motorcycle Hill to the 11,000 foot camp.
Yeah, 11 is kind of where, like Steve mentioned, people traditionally would switch from some kind of flotation system, be it, you know, snowshoes or skis, to cramponing. And it's also, you're really starting to climb at this point. The terrain changes quite a bit. The distances between camps is much shorter lineally, but that largely goes unnoticed because it's so much steeper. So this, you really feel like you're climbing here. This is a good place to get your crampon boot interaction dialed in and make sure that you have your act together before you're on the trail. It's hopefully not the first time that you've you've thought about that. And it's also a place where the terrain gets a little more serious, in my opinion. Motorcycle Hill's not too bad. It does have a couple of kind of big crevasses at the top, but usually they're pretty easily crossed or in run. But as you get a little higher right above it, the next kind of feature is Squirrel Hill. That does have kind of a double fall line. It can be a little icier. You're starting to get exposed to the winds a little more. And there have been fatalities due to falls up there, where there really hasn't, largely below here on the mountain. So it does kind of change nature in moving from 11 to 14 versus below 11, that you're actually sort of climbing now. And you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about how you do that. The other thing that I just want to mention, that this slide's pretty good. Go back to that slide for a second, Steve. Yeah, just one thing about that camp is, like Steve did mention, this is a good picture of it. It is a camp that's a little more threatened than some of the other camps. In this picture, skiers left, there is some sort of Chirac fall hazard. And actually the primary hazard's sort of out of frame up and to the left, skiers left. But then there's also this slope.
Here
Yeah, and you can actually see a little bit of debris in that sunshade line that's come down
here.
Yeah, and then on the lookers or skiers right in this picture, there is a slope that has a bit of an angle to it, and that can wind load and release. So you kind of want to split the difference and be out in the middle there. And I kind of like to be in the upper middle of camp, kind of right where the trail splits the camp there somewhere, and just be thoughtful. And then the final thing I would say about this camp is there are actually a lot of crevasses that run through the middle of this camp. It's a big accumulation zone. It snows a lot, so they're well hidden a lot of times, and usually generally well covered. But people have fallen into crevasses right in the middle of camp. So even though you'll see people unroped, wandering around in camp, I generally don't make a habit of it. This is a pretty good camp to probe and kind of stay in your little zone unless you're roped up. It's just a good policy in this camp, I think.
So this does show that there can be, if you're a good enough skier and you get conditions like this, which isn't every day, it can be pretty nice to have skis. But this shows the track going up Motorcycle hill. And we got a bunch of pictures, another picture here of motorcycle hill. That's another pretty typical thing. One thing I want to point out, if you're not used to looking at Denali weather, you know, there's some haze here and there's some wind clouds here. So this is actually probably a bit of a risky day to move. My read just from looking at this picture is that there is a storm coming in that probably has a lot of wind associated with it. And wind is something that can really shut you down and actually threaten your life up here. So you got to be super cognizant of those kinds of things. Want to talk about this little spot? This is kind of a crux for a lot of people.
Yeah, this is Squirrel Hill. So after you climb Motorcycle Hill there, it takes about an hour, and then you have a little flat spot to take a break, and then you climb Squirrel Hill there. And this is the one I was talking about, the double fall line. You're going up, obviously, but it also slopes to the left, of the climber's left, as we're looking at this. And the wind can kind of come around Windy Corner down the polo field and wrap over here, and it can be kind of wind scoured, especially this upper part. So it can be snowy, and like in this picture, but it can also be quite icy. So I think this is a good place to be cognizant of that. And I've actually seen people put running protection in here in its worst conditions. And I think that would be a little bit unusual, but it's not unheard of. So just be aware of that. And you also still are pretty heavy. And as you can see in this picture, a lot of people are still using sleds. So you have that added hazard of the sled trying to pull you off. So this is kind of where the first real hazard, and it's once it slides left, then it drops off quite precipitously down to the Peters Glacier. So that's something you definitely don't want to get involved in. And then we'll look at the next slide here. I think, Steve, can you go forward one?
Beginning of the polo field here.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the polo field. And so this is once you've topped out that little hill. And I also think this is worth a mention. Usually on the way down, this is kind of a big flat area here. And if the visibility is bad, which it can be here, it's a little bit hard to navigate right to that entrance and go down Squirrel Hill. And it matters a lot that you're on the track there. So, you know, you can wand this, or certainly have your act together with your GPS navigation. And it might be worth taking a personal waypoint or two here at the bottom of the polo field for that re-entry to drop into Squirrel Hill, because you want to be right you want to be right on the trail in the right spot. And you can see this gets kind of wind scoured here, and the trail is not super obvious if the visibility is bad. So have your act together there navigation wise.
So this is just looking up the route from about that same spot, just slightly higher, looking up towards Windy Corner. This is the kind of day you want to be going around Windy Corner. We'll show you a picture of a day you don't want to be going around Windy Corner. But this is actually one of the, I think, more dangerous parts of the climbing route. This is the Windy Corner has killed quite a few people over the years because it's hard to navigate. There's a lot of crevasses, and it is windy. Here's a nice day, and you can see these guys getting blown around a little bit. It's just the way the mountain is laid out. It's just a bit of a funnel. This is the cache spot right above Windy Corner that's pretty typical. Windy Corner is just down here, and you can see there's maybe some other pictures of it, but you can see there are quite a few crevasses through here. And then you don't go out here, you make a big hard right around there. So that's another view of it. So this is a good spot to take a break or to leave a cache. There's another view of the same cache spot, and you can see these crevasses coming down around Windy Corner, and that's where you're going. You're going down and right over where that scoured area is. Here's some climbers just above, a little higher. And here's some people going down into that same area. I thought this picture, I was looking for this picture. This shows how, you're kind of wandering around. There's quite a few slots here. This changes even during the season. The crevasses and the glacier will change here. This is the point I wanted to talk about skiing on the upper mountain. The only real reason to bring your skis above 11 is if you really just want to have some fun skiing, or your goal is to actually ski off of the summit. I can, I've been skiing my whole life. I can ski well, but honestly, like, it doesn't save me that much time to have skis, and you have to have probably another pair of boots, and you probably have to have you obviously have to carry the skis and skins and possibly ski crampons. So, you know, it's something I would like to do once, actually ski off of the summit. I may try to do that one day, but it's unless you're going for that as your objective. I personally think that the risk reward equation just, it's not real clear that skis are an advantage. And it's also very condition dependent. There can be, like, Windy Corner can be all blue ice, and there's no way you can ski through there. I've also skied around Windy Corner in, you know, shin deep powder that was perfect and totally unwind affected. So it's it's very, very condition dependent. The whole skis question, and that varies from season to season and even from week to week on the mountain. So tell us about this place a little bit, Mark.
Now we're at 14.
Yeah, 14 is a really important place on this mountain. And it's also, I want to say, dangerous for another reason, because a lot of people just never get above 14. They get to 14 and then they look up and they get intimidated and they don't actually make it out of here. So this is you got to really look at this in both ways. It's easy to get anchored down here. So
I think of this as like I think the route really changes nature. I think of the mountain kind of below 14 and above 14. To back up a little bit, I think we'll discuss this some, but to get to 14 from 11 is actually pretty hard. This is kind of one of if people haven't had a wake up call yet, this move, you know, the cache day and the move day back to back to get from 11 to 14 are hard. And people are usually pretty knackered when they roll into 14. It doesn't feel like 14,000 feet at you know, a lower 48 latitude. So that's the first thing, is getting to 14 in good shape and getting recovered from that effort, which I think is super important. Spending you know, maybe I think it was a minimum of 4 nights at 14 before you try and go higher. But then it's also really a place where you start thinking really critically about the weather. You need good weather to move around the corner. You know, hopefully you've made a good decision there, but you really don't want to go above here unless the weather is good. 17, which is, you know, the high camp and the only remaining camp on the route, is a really inhospitable place to camp if the weather is bad. So I think of the trip as kind of trying to get to 14, get a cache in on the ridge, be recovered and acclimated, and that's kind of when I think of the sort of summit push as starting from 14. Because in a perfect world, you'd like to be super strong, move to 17 in a reasonable fashion, summit the next day, and then get out of there. You ideally don't want one of those extended survival camping trips at 17. And the way you don't do that is you don't go up there until you're ready to go to the top. So I think that's kind of a really good way to think about it. This is also a big, nice camp. You can walk around unroped. The weather is generally pretty decent for how a big flat spot it is. You think it would get hammered a little more, and it can get hammered, but it's actually pretty decent there a lot of the times. It's just bad windy up high. So it's a good spot to socialize, to get to know people, and to kind of get your act together before you go on the upper mountain.
Yeah, I really encourage people to not get stuck here. So let's move on. You know, this is looking up the upper mountain. As you can see, this is the track going up to the base of the fixed lines, which we're going to talk about quite a bit. The fixed lines go up the head wall right here. But I also want to talk about this. This is one of the things that will alert you to the presence of the National Park Service up here. And this is something that needs a little discussion, I believe. The Park Service, as you can see here in this part of the picture, maintains a camp that was originally established for medical research purposes. And it is still sometimes called the medical camp. These people are not here to rescue you. They're not even really here to help you. They're here to I think you should approach, one of the mistakes I think a lot of people make with approaching Denali is that they think that there's going to be some sort of resource or help if they get in trouble or they're not experienced enough, and that these people over here are going to help them out. And that is just wrong. These people are there to mostly enforce the rules. You have rules that you have to have a permit, rules that you have to dispose of human waste properly, rules that apply to only the guide surfaces. These people are not here to rescue you or to help you or to necessarily even give you a weather forecast. They do at times tend to provide all of those services, but those are only in emergencies. You need to be taking care of yourself up here. Do you want to, we got one more picture of their camp here. This is just obviously a series of their supply helicopter coming in to land. But do you want to add anything else to that? There is a medical officer there all the time. You maybe touch on that a second, Mark?
Yeah, so basically what the park does is they run these ranger patrols that are, there'll be 2 or 3 on the mountain, and there'll be at least one at 14 at all times during the middle of the season. And that each patrol constitutes of an actual law enforcement ranger who works for the park and several other climbers. And one of those other climbers will have some medical background. They might be, in the best case scenario, they're an ER doc. They might be a paramedic with some extensive training. They might be a nurse, but they have some kind of backcountry medical experience. And they are a resource for emergencies only. And basically, they'll go into it, but they're not in the business of helping people unless it's a life-threatening situation. If you go to them for a life-threatening situation, they're going to help you get out of there, and your trip is over, and your party's trip is over. So it's not a casual thing. But that being said, it's good to be aware of what your resources are in emergency, or other people you encounter having emergency, and they're there for that. So just a good way to think about that.
So let's move on to another big topic I want to hit on that I think is one of the top mistakes that people make is building walls. Walls, I think people who are not with the guided parties tend to not really build walls very, very often, or they underestimate the importance of them. And to me, it's one of the most important things of climbing Denali is having a good, safe camp. And the weather is severe, and if it comes in, I've seen it blow away and destroy tents. So you need that are unprotected by walls. So, so keep in mind that that's an important thing. Mark, you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on in this picture and just explain this to people and I'm going to talk about that shovel too.
So yeah, you can see here, Dave, this is called a bulldog, but this is an actual like $200 British gardening spade. It's basically unbreakable. And so whilst you might not necessarily carry one of those, they are quite useful. This is not a place to shave weight. You want to have a shovel that's capable of chopping through thin ice lenses and moving some pretty solid snow, because the snow is quite hard up here. So here you can see, one person is cutting blocks with the snow saw, and then another person is popping them out. And there's kind of 2 things going on here at once. This is the quarry that we're using to get blocks out of to build the walls. But then this hole, which has been carefully sized with the wands, will become the kitchen area. So you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone by quarrying nice solid blocks for the walls, but then the hole is a very useful size to have as a kitchen. So just think in terms of the tools that you're going to want to have up there. And I think a real saw and a couple of fairly robust shovels are a bare minimum on Denali. And if you have a larger party, I think a steel spade is a really useful tool. It's nice for these quarrying times, but it's also really nice for when you're bearing the parachutes from your tent and you've gotten weathered in at a camp for a few nights. Those parachutes get quite frozen in. And you certainly can chop them out with your adze, but a steel spade makes quick work of those. So I would consider a spade, especially in a larger party. And I bring a shovel or a spade for every member of the party. So a party of four would maybe have 3 shovels and a spade. I don't think that's overkill for camp building.
Here's another view of 14. It's a really beautiful place. That's this mountain we've been seeing over here in the distance is Mount Foraker. And yes, whenever you can, here's an example. Somebody just pulled in. If you just pulled in and the weather's like this, yeah, just set up without a wall, no problem. Sleep one night. But then if you're there for any time, you may start, even the next day, start to build your walls. If you roll in and it's already the storm is coming in, you're going to have a hard day of doing that, of moving and building tents. Also, just want to say that, a lot of fun is had up here. It's not all serious. It's not all, difficult. I don't want to make it sound like this is a horrible experience. A lot of people have fun. I don't know what these guys are Rochambeauing for, but there's a lot. It's a very social experience, and you're going to make probably friends for life while you're up here. So here's looking down from, back at the 14 camp, and there's Mount Foraker and the lower Kahiltna down here. And this is approaching the head wall with the fixed ropes. And we want to talk about this a little bit. Looks like, you're still in glacier travel mode. There's still crevasses here. And here's a good view of the track. Usually goes pretty much straight up and then kind of comes in. And these people here are gearing up to get on the fixed lines, and the fixed lines start probably somewhere where these couple of people are standing. This is pretty good conditions that you see right here where it looks white. That means there's a little bit of snow on it. I've also seen this where it's just, I'm sure Mark has too, where it's just bullet hard blue ice. That's typically more early season in my experience. And as the temperatures warm up and you get into snowier month of June, it tends to be a little whiter and a little softer. If this is the most technically difficult part of the climb, and this wrecks a lot of people. A lot of people don't get higher than the top of the fixed lines because they have a hard time climbing this. So if climbing 45, 50 degree ice with a heavy pack for, a little bit over 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet, 400 meters is really hard for you, you need to improve your climbing technique. You need to have good cramponing technique. This is what it looks like. This is the up line on the climber's right and the down line on the climber's left. Typically, that's how it's supposed to be laid out. And generally people follow those rules. But you can this gives a good idea of what it's like. These guys getting into some icier, more difficult climbing here. But this should be something that you should feel comfortable on. And if you're not comfortable going up and down terrain like this, you need to improve your technical skills somewhere else before showing up here. So I don't mean to rant, but I'm trying to help you guys set up for success. Mark, you want to add any comments to that?
Yeah, my only comments here is that 2 things. You want to have your system for attaching yourself to the fixed line, which is typically a Jumar and an ascender, pretty dialed before you go up here. This isn't a place to be figuring out how to use your ascender. So people typically use a leash with a carabiner and an ascender, and have that system well dialed. So because this is a bit of a bottleneck on the mountain, and especially after kind of a bad weather stretch and everybody's heading up there the same day. And you don't want to be that person who's clustering around. So have your technical systems well dialed, but also have your packing dialed. This is not the place to have things poorly connected to your pack, and especially water bottles and the big CMC toilet can. They're kind of hard to attach to things, and they're slippery, and they become projectiles to the people below you, because this terrain is steeper. And I've almost gotten hit a few times with water bottles, a crampon, and a couple times with CMC cans on this line. So it's greatly not appreciated by the people below you if things come raining down. So have your act together and be an example to people, not an example of the other end of the training spectrum here. Which
we have a few more good pictures of this area to give people an idea of what it looks like. And I want to add that it's not a bad idea, though not everybody does it. I try to wear a helmet on this section because I'm worried, not because there's rock fall, but because I'm worried about somebody dropping something on me. I will often consider the traffic on the fixed lines in my strategy for when I move up and down. If I'm an independent, smaller party, I will try to avoid being up there with a big guided group, either coming up or going down. This is a great shot from Colby Coombs, that head guide and owner of Alaska Mountaineering School, that he got from the air of people going up. This berg trend is usually around the start of the fixed lines, and you can see people going up the fixed lines here. And then this is about 16,200 feet here. And then just above the fixed lines here, we'll show you another picture, but this is the typical cache spot right up in these rocks. Tends to be a little bit of snow that accumulates. And then this is 1,000, or actually a couple thousand feet lower back over here. This is the Upper Peters Glacier over there. So here's a group of happy climbers, and some of them wearing helmets as they should, at the top of the fixed lines right there in this spot. So that you can, to me, this is the moment where you really feel like you're on a big mountain now, and you're up high. You've got amazing views. The world kind of drops off around you. It's one of the most, I think a lot of people say that this section between 16.2 and 17.2 is the most beautiful part of the climb, and it's hard to argue with that. Mark, you want to tell us what's going on here? This is just above the fixed lines here.
Yeah, so this is kind of the beginning of the 16 ridge. And I also think this is actually one of the more hazardous spots on the ridge. It's kind of a steep side hill that drops off to the Peters. So there's commonly fixed pickets. There's like 3 fixed pickets in this section. So these folks are going through that, and you can actually see somebody in the middle there that might be kneeling down, dealing with one of those.
Yeah, I think this guy might be clipping a picket.
I think that guy might be clipping through the protection. So that's another thing to really have dialed, is your program for fixed protection and running pro. And in general, these pickets are fixed there. You can kind of get up-to-date information when you're on the mountain, but it's worth the leader of the group having some extra free carabiners, because commonly the pickets are fixed, but there's no carabiner on. So you would clip those on there, and then the last person in your party would clean them. And then the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, and this is probably as good a place as any, is it's nice to do a cache day on the ridge for a couple reasons. One, a mod on food and fuel up on the ridge in anticipation of your 17 move. But it also gives you a chance to go up the fixed lines and possibly up part of the ridge with a little lighter pack, and kind of get a feel for what you're dealing with if you haven't been up there, and maybe just polish some of your techniques that hopefully are already pretty well dialed. So I encourage people to put in a cache. And if you have a strong team and you're feeling good, don't stop at the top of the fixed lines. Go up the ridge a ways, and there are several flat spots all the way up to, including right to the base of Washburn's Thumb, which is a prominent feature on the ridge. And you can cache well up the ridge and have a nice little dry run on the ridge line with a lighter pack. And then also when you move and you grab that cache, probably en route on your move day, and pick it up, it's all the closer to 17. So yeah, you don't necessarily have to cache right at the top of the fixed lines. Think about some alternate strategies there.
Yeah, no, I think that those are really good insights that Mark is bringing. I just want to reemphasize one point Mark already made, that it's really important that you know how to use running protection here, and even placing your own pickets, because if somebody on your rope team falls here, you're all going down to the Peters Glacier. You're going like 2,000 feet down the wrong side of the mountain, typically. So it's a dangerous part of the mountain. You need to travel rope together for the most part. And you need to be clipping running protection or using what's called terrain belays. And if you don't know what running protection and terrain belays are, you absolutely need to know that before you go. Somebody's asking around about crampons. I would never bring aluminum crampons on Denali because it's super icy and the ice is hard, and that would be a mistake, I believe. Steel is real. Same thing with the shovels. Mark is not kidding when, you know, the the value of a steel shovel. You know, you can buy these pretty small steel spades that are only about 3 feet long, and I've literally seen those things save people's lives up there because they're able to dig into the snow and get protection from the wind and storm, where with an typical aluminum or plastic avalanche shovel, you just have absolutely no chance of digging into that snow. So here's another view of here. The top of the fixed lines is hard to see. It's actually right here, I think. And this is higher on the ridge. This is the Upper Peters Glacier. The 14,000 foot camp is down over here. Another view up a little higher. This is actually that spot Mark mentioned right about the base of Washburn's Thumb, one of the more spectacular spots where the ridge really narrows and you're looking down both sides of the mountain. So this feature right here is the West Buttress, this ridge that you're now on. And there's Windy Corner right down there. Mount Foraker out there, really gorgeous country. This is looking the opposite direction from just above Washburn's Thumb. And the 17,000 foot camp is just right up here on this plateau. Okay, we're going to talk quite a bit now about the summit area and this upper part of the mountain. This is the 17,200 foot camp, sometimes called High Camp. And, you know, this is where most people climb to the summit from. I've talked in other places extensively about climbing from 14. If you have the fitness and can climb from 14, by all means do so. Fitness and experience and technical skill, by all means do so. 17,000 feet is a hard place to live. I've spent a lot of nights here and I don't remember a single one of them being like super fun. So, you know, you really feel the altitude here. You really feel the cold here. You definitely feel like this is the most like Himalayan feeling camp I've ever been in that's outside of the Himalaya. This feels, you know, you're only at 5,000 meters roughly here, but you feel like you're up at 6,500, 7,000 meters in the Himalaya is the equivalent in my feeling of like what it feels like. Let's just look at a little bit of the layout of the mountain here that everyone can see this. The camp is just off of this picture. We couldn't find a picture that had the camp in it, but it's not that far. And then this is the route up to the summit is pretty gradual right out of camp. And then this whole traverse is called the Audubon. It basically gets more or less, roughly speaking, it gets steeper the further you go. And this is all side hilling. And this is another place where a lot of accidents and deaths have occurred, where people fall and they fall down here and they go into these crevasses or they go down into the valley below the 17,000 foot camp and they get injured. This is a really serious spot here. Note that when you come to Denali Pass, which is just over 18,000 feet, you don't actually come to the base of the pass. You actually come in right by these little rocks here. That's a good landmark to have. There are no fixed ropes here, but there are usually fixed pickets, but not always. So you have to ask at the 14,000 foot camp or ask people who have recently been to the summit and find out what the situation is here. I'll go ahead and talk through this a little more, but from Denali Pass, it's usually for average pace, roughly 2 hours to the Denali Pass from the high camp. And then from there, you're going on the other side of this ridge. That's why that line is indicated as a dashed line. You can't quite see where you climb. But you basically follow the backside of that ridge up into this area. Here, this is a little thing called Archdeacon's Tower. You actually descend down a little bit onto this area called the football field. You go up this hard climb called Pig Hill to the summit ridge. And then from the base of the summit ridge, you still have a good half an hour or so up to the summit. You know, a fast time from the 7,000 foot camp or 17,000 foot camp to the summit is like 6 to 7 hours for the average West Buttress party, but it's not uncommon for people to take 10 or 12 hours. As a guide, I've had many of a 20 to 24 hour round trip summit day going from the high camp up to the summit and back. It is hard to move fast up here. You're really high. And one of the things that you have to be is you have to be patient with this part of the climbing. Okay, so Mark, do you have anything to add to that little summary? And then we're going to go through some pictures of the summit day as well.
No, I think that's pretty good. The one thing I would add to the ever-present question about potentially summiting from 14, I think it's, obviously important, like Steve said, for super fit, experienced mountaineers, that certainly is possible, and people do it. But I think you want to be fairly well acclimated, and it's pretty easy to answer that question yourself. If you're at 14 and you take an acclimatization run, just a day trip up to 17 camp and back, or I've gone up to Denali Pass and back as kind of an acclimatization hike. If that's an easy half day for you to run to 17 and back, then you're probably a contender to potentially go to the summit round trip. But if going to 17 back feels like anything approaching a full day outing, it only gets harder above there. So you should very easily be able to run to Denali Pass and back on an acclimatization run from 14 if going to the top and back in a reasonable day is in the cards for you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mark. I wish I've thought of saying that same thing. So thanks for saying that. In terms of some benchmarks, like for me, typically going from 14 to the top of the fixed lines is about 2 hours, and I don't feel like that's too hard. I have pretty good technical skills, obviously, so it might be a little longer. But if it's taking you longer than say 4 hours to get from 14 to 17, 4 or 5, you got to really think hard about like whether or not you have the fitness and technical skills and efficiency to do a summit day from 14. So yeah, like for me, an average summit 14 to summit time is roughly around 7 hours. I'm probably faster than average, but I'm not like pushing it. Like I'm not racing. Like I'm not struggling to do that. I'm just like walking up there. So keep those numbers in mind. Like you always need to have a reserve up here. You can never empty your tank on Denali because that's when you're going to get into trouble. The people that empty their tanks, they tend to be the ones that get hurt and killed. So here's a great shot of looking down the Audubon about halfway up. You can see the tents here, and this camp is not that big, as you can see. And you basically just walk up here. There's typically a trail. You can see climbers obviously streaming out of camp. And this is a pretty typical conditions. This is what I would say good conditions for going across the Audubon, where there's like a lot of these steps in here. I've also seen this where it's basically blue ice, and then it's really scary and difficult to climb this. In fact, if it's actual blue ice, there's no way around the blue ice. I would probably not go up there. But this is nice, good cramponable snow. It's firm, it's squeaky, but it's not icy and hard. This is just up above where that picture was taken, going up on a typical summit day. These rocks are known as the zebra rocks for obvious reasons, and this is one of the major landmarks. I used to know the exact elevations of all these places, but you also find GPS waypoints that will reference these things. Just jump in, Mark, if you have more to add.
No, you're on a roll. Keep going. It's great.
Okay, so this is basically the far, let's say, what would that be, west end of the football field. The route actually comes down this hill. Kind of see a track going right up here. This is Archdeacon's Tower. So I wanted this slide here, and I'll reiterate this again. When you come down from the summit, and if it's a whiteout, the fall line is to go off here. And that is a really bad idea. That has happened to a number of people, and that has led to a number of accidents and deaths by people not coming down onto the football field and realizing they actually have to climb up and they have to stay to the south of Archdeacon's Tower here and then go over. So let me show you that route picture again where I'm talking about. So that's looking up this hill that we can't quite see. And this little summit right here is this little summit that you see here. It's just on this east side, it's rocky. And on this west side, it doesn't look like anything. This other little bump here is also a pretty good landmark. It doesn't look like much here, but you'll see it and we'll go around it as you come up and as you go down. This section is fairly flat. This is fairly downhill. This is downhill the other way. But you can see if you come off the summit and come down what's called Pig Hill here, the fall line is going to take you way down into this valley. You don't want to do that. So this is Pig Hill, going up to Pig Hill. This is from the other end of the football field. Sometimes this typically goes up like this, and then it ends up going fairly straight up here. And this is the summit ridge. You can't really see the summit here. And then this is another view of that. Here's the top of Pig Hill. These guys are going down, and here's where you come up onto the summit ridge right here. This looks like a late in the day. There's Mount Foraker down here. You're higher than Mount Foraker. At this point, you're actually higher than any point in North America already. And this is the summit ridge. I want to point out that the summit ridge is no joke. There's some very exposed climbing here. And again, people typically want to be using some sort of running protection. Here's the rope clipped to a picket. You don't want to fall off here either way. This way goes down about 8,000 feet down the base of the south face, and there's no way you'd survive that. And this way goes down, probably only 1,000 feet. So definitely not a place where you want to mess up. In a lot of these pictures here in the beginning, it doesn't look like that much, but this is pretty exposed, and then you can see where there's a climber here. There's some real exposed sections here. I think it often surprises people how exposed this section of the route is. And it's also, hopefully you want to have a really nice day like this. I want to mention too that I've had every kind of experience on the summit of Denali, from like feeling like I could easily be killed if things went wrong, like really, really serious weather and navigation issues, and been up there with sick people and had all kinds of problems. I've also been up there in days where I didn't need to wear gloves, and I could just wear like, a fleece jacket and a wind shell, and I was comfy and cozy, and there was no wind, and I sat on the summit for 4 or 5 hours one time. You could have spent the night there. It was amazing. So everything in between those two experiences is possible. I think I've been on that summit, I lost track, but somewhere between 25 and 30 times. So Mark, do you have anything to add about the summit? Here's a nice picture of somebody actually on the top there.
Yeah, the thing I would say is that those pictures don't really do justice to how steep especially the south side of the summit ridge is. It's pretty steep terrain on either side of that ridge. So like Steve was saying, running protection is definitely in order for most parties going along the ridge there. And I also find for most people, loitering on the summit for extended amounts of time doesn't serve them well on the descent. I think that altitude at that latitude, just most people aren't really as acclimated as they think if it's day 12 or 14 of the trip. And I've had, kind of like Steve's, I've had trips where I was on the top for 10 minutes and turned around, and I've had, especially if I was waiting for another rope team from my team, I think I was on the summit for 3+ hours with a client one time, and that it took a long time to come down. People suffered just from sitting up there forever. So certainly enjoy your summit experience, but yeah, more is not always necessarily better up there.
Yeah. I also want to add, there's a lot of questions about skiing. Like, I actually feel like skiing off of big mountain summits is a bit of a, I'm going to go off on a rant here for a second. I think it's a bit of a joke, honestly, because the skiing conditions are crummy. Like, you're not skiing, like you're survival skiing. And I'm a skier, like I love skiing. It's one of my favorite things to do. You're only skiing off the summit of Denali to say you do it. I guarantee you that I can climb and descend Denali from 14 faster with just a pair of boots and crampons than almost any skier, okay? Killian maybe is his own deal. But you never have good conditions doing that. Even when Killian, I watched Killian do the speed record. I was at 14 when he did that, and I helped those guys. He had to stop multiple times and rewarm his feet because he had, lightweight boots on and his feet got cold. He had to ski down really slowly because the skiing conditions were really bad. And I think that's pretty typical of skiing on big mountains. Also, same thing when I was on Cho'oyu. I saw people trying to ski. I was climbing up and down way faster than Cho'oyu, much faster than the people with skis. Because I didn't have to deal, and you're dealing with wind-affected poor snow. these mountains are super windy. The snow conditions are bad for skiing, but they're great for cramponing. I want to add that the summit can be very social. End of rant. I want to add the summit can be very social, and you have to be really careful about this because you don't want to get stuck behind people if you're faster than them. So there's strategy. One of the biggest hazards on this mountain is other people. And that's a big assumption assuming that you're always stronger than the other party. That may not be true. But you have to always pay attention to what other people are doing and work around them. So here's the actual marker on the summit. This is sometimes buried in snow and sometimes it's sticking out like this, looking out to Forker. But this is how you really know you're on the top. Coming back down again, like as the famous saying goes, you're basically half done. There's a lot, you want to be feeling pumped and good like this guy is and having a great day. It's obviously a warm day, a nice day. This guy's pretty lightly dressed. So he's having a good day up there. The way out, I think, Mark, why don't you talk a little bit about the strategy for getting out? Because I think that's something that people don't think enough about. Yeah,
and there's a couple of strategies, but a typical trip obviously would come down and spend another night at 17, assuming you started from 17. If you start from 14, obviously you're going all the way down. Assuming you slept at 17 another night, you get up in the morning, and morning is in air quotes because might not feel that frisky the next day. You work your way down to 14, and then at 14, I really start to kind of think about a couple of things. I think about how's everyone in the party doing? And I start thinking about the conditions on the lower glacier. And what typically I'll do is kind of repack at 14, rest a little bit, but later that afternoon, potentially head down to like 11, if everyone's doing well, and then sleep at 11. And then you can get up. I get up super early in the morning. Typically I get up at like 2 in the morning at 11 if you slept there. And then you can go all the way down quite quickly to Ski Hill. And then you're probably down at the base of Ski Hill at something on the order of like 4 in the morning, having gotten a good chunk of rest the night before. And then you can cross that lower Kahiltna, that 5 miles back to base camp, which goes by pretty quickly. People, if they have their actor, can do that in 2 or 3 hours. And then you roll into base camp, something in the order of 6 to 8 a.m. In the morning. And then you're kind of set up, assuming they're flying, to go check in with Lisa at 8 in the morning, and then fly out later that morning. I think that's a pretty typical scenario. But if the party is tired, consider spending another night at 14 for sure. If you spend a good chunk of a day and an evening at 14, you can be really well rested, and you can probably fly out around that same time. But always think about crossing that lower glacier in those wee hours of the morning, kind of between 2 and certainly 6 a.m. When it's frozen the hardest, and you have the best chance of having easy travel and good conditions to stay out of the crevasses. I think that's a super important thing at the end of the trip. It's easy to kind of let your guard down and come out of there in the middle of the afternoon and have something go wrong. So just be patient on the. Yeah,
I want to just reiterate what Mark said, that listen to his words carefully about the timing and the expectations of your group and the fitness of your group at this time, and make the right decision for you. Don't get in a rush. Try to avoid the cows to the barn. If you can, if you're strong and you're fit, you can get down super fast, but don't push it. It's the mountain is still a dangerous place.
It's also it's a really good time just to be patient with each other, and be considerate of your teammates. Regardless of how well you plan it, everyone's going to be tired, and everyone's going to smell the barn to some extent. And I've seen what were formerly really good trips kind of come unraveled, more on like a personal relationship level than a mountaineering level, those last 12 to 24 hours of the trip. So it's work getting down out of there, and it's hard, and you have all your stuff with you, and the sled is trying to run you over all the time. So just be patient with each other, work together, help your teammates, and try and end the trip on a good note, not on a sour note.
That's great advice, Mark. Really glad you said that. This picture is someone who rolled into base camp in the middle of the night and just drew and just dossed. They just put their sleeping bag down on their sleeping pad and they fell asleep. It was obviously good weather and they're expecting to fly out the next day. And hopefully that's what happens. You know, this is what you want to see when you get to base camp. You want to see a flotilla of airplanes parked there. You want to be hearing those planes. And you may not be, you know, you may also, you know, I've had times, I think I mentioned where one time in particular where I waited 8 days to fly out of here. So it can, you know, it can be a waiting game. But ideally, you know, you're going to get out of there and, you know, also think about, you know, just, you know, this is where you're trying to go. This is where basically every Denali trip ends. This is the Fairview Inn. This is the bar where everybody parties down. And I've certainly had some pretty epic nights in here. And I know Mark has. We couldn't find any pictures of anybody partying in the Fairview because everybody you know has the no cameras in the Fairview policy. I've eaten some pickled eggs. I've danced on some tables. I've done some crazy stuff in my life in that building. So I'm sure all of you will carry on the tradition. I know
Ring
Mark,
the bell.
I've been there with Mark, but he's been pretty wild too, actually. So it can be good times. And that's, I think, kind of where we're going to leave it for today. I think, I don't know about you, Mark, but I think we bit off a bit more than we could chew. It's almost 2.5 hours now. But I just want to end with special thanks to the people that provided some of these amazing photos, especially Dustin English. The majority of these pictures were his. Alaska Mountaineering School set us up with some great pictures, and Porter sent some great images as well. And you know, we'll continue the Denali discussions in the future with some fitness talks and some gear talks, and we'll be posting this up for you all to see. And thank you all for joining us. It was a great audience, and I'm amazed that so many of you held on for so long. That was amazing.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out for 2.5 hours. Appreciate everybody's patience.
Yeah. And thank you, Mark, for all your insights. That was great.
Yeah, for sure. It's fun reminiscing a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Any questions we forgot, please post them to the forum under the mountaineering section, and one of us will get to them eventually. Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great evening. Have a great day.